3 years after burying my husband, I saw him alive in a bustling Cairo bazaar. But he didn't die. He disappeared, and when our eyes met, he ran. The dust of Cairo tasted like ghosts and forgotten promises. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd held Mark's hand. 3 years since the world had tilted on its axis and thrown me into a free fall of grief. For 1,095 days, my daughter Lily and I had been living in grayscale, just going through the motions, a ghost in our own lives. This trip, this journey to the land of pharaohs and endless sand, was my desperate attempt to find color again. It was supposed to be our trip. Mark's, mine, and Lily's. Mark had been obsessed with ancient Egypt since he was a boy. Our bookshelves were still crammed with his dog-eared guides, books on hieroglyphics, and biographies of Howard Carter. He had an itinerary planned down to the hour, a laminated dream he'd kept tucked in his bedside table. "One day, Elena," he'd say, his eyes gleaming with excitement, "we'll see the sun rise over the pyramids, I promise." But promises die with people. The laminated dream became a relic, a painful reminder of a future that had been stolen, until a few months ago when Lily, now a bright and curious 10-year-old, found it. She'd looked up at me, her eyes so much like her father's, and said, "Mom, we should still go, for Dad." And so, here we were. I was trying so hard to see it all through his eyes, the sheer overwhelming scale of the Giza necropolis, the silent golden gaze of Tutankhamun's mask in the museum, the way the feluccas sailed down the Nile like ancient spirits. I was trying, but his absence was a physical presence beside me, a shadow that the Egyptian sun couldn't burn away. Every time Lily would gasp in wonder at a carving or a piece of jewelry, my first instinct was to turn and share the moment with him. The ache that followed was a familiar, unwelcome friend. Lily, however, was thriving. She was her father's daughter through and through. She'd spent the flight reading about the gods and goddesses, and now she pointed them out with authority, her small finger tracing the air. "Look, Mom, that's Anubis. He weighed the hearts of the dead," she'd declared at the Valley of the Kings. I'd smiled, a real smile, but my own heart felt heavy enough to fail any celestial test. On our 4th day, we dove into the chaotic symphony of the Khan El Khalili Bazaar. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices, fragrant oils, and grilling meat. The labyrinthine alleyways buzzed with the chatter of a dozen languages and the clinking of metal as artisans hammered away in their tiny shops. For the first time on the trip, the sheer sensory overload managed to push the grief into a corner. Lily was ecstatic, her eyes wide as she took in the colorful lanterns, the glittering jewelry, and the pyramids of fragrant spices. She haggled fiercely with a shopkeeper over a small lapis lazuli scarab beetle, her brow furrowed in concentration, just like Mark's used to when he was focused. Watching her, a genuine laugh escaped me, a sound I barely recognized. For a fleeting moment, we were just a mother and daughter on an adventure. We were okay. I bought her the beetle, and she clutched it in her palm as if it were the most precious treasure on earth. I was watching her radiant face, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that I hadn't felt in years, when a flicker of movement in the crowd snagged my attention. A man was standing a few stalls down, his back to me, examining a silver coffee pot. It wasn't just that he was tall, or that he had the same dark, unruly hair as Mark. It was the way he stood. His weight shifted onto his right leg, his head tilted slightly to the left as he considered the object. It was a posture I had seen 1,000,000 times, a stance so uniquely, intimately familiar that my breath caught in my throat. My heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. It was impossible. A cruel trick of the light, of my own desperate, longing mind. I blinked hard, trying to clear the image, but he was still there. He turned his head slightly, and I saw his profile, the strong jawline, the laugh lines around his eyes that crinkled even when he wasn't smiling. The world around me dissolved into a muffled roar. The scents, the sounds, the people, they all vanished. There was only him. Lily was saying something, tugging on my sleeve, but I couldn't hear her. I took a shaky step forward, then another. My voice cracked, a broken, desperate sound that was swallowed by the market's roar. "Mark?" The man froze. Slowly, he turned his head, and his eyes met mine. The eyes that met mine were Mark's, the same deep-set hazel eyes that could change from green to brown in the light, the same eyes that had looked at me with adoration on our wedding day, and with gentle reassurance when Lily was born. But the expression in them was all wrong. There was no love, no shock of reunion. There was only a flash of wide-eyed recognition, instantly extinguished and replaced by a cold, shuttered panic. It was the look of a man cornered. "I'm sorry," he said, and the sound of his voice, that familiar baritone, sent a tremor through my entire body. It was him. It was his voice. "You must be mistaken." He took a small step back, his hand tightening on the coffee pot he was holding. My mind refused to process it. Mistaken? How could I be mistaken about the face I had kissed 1,000 times, the scar above his eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bike at 12, the tiny mole just beside his nose? "Mark, it's me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's Elena and Lily." I gestured blindly beside me to our daughter, who was staring up at the man, her face a pale mask of confusion, her hand clutching the scarab beetle so tightly her knuckles were white. "Lily?" the man repeated, and for a heart-stopping second, his composure cracked. His gaze flickered to my daughter, and I saw a universe of pain and something that looked terrifyingly like regret flash across his face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He shook his head more forcefully this time. "My name is not Mark. I don't know you." He thrust a handful of crumpled Egyptian pounds at the bewildered shopkeeper, not even waiting for change. He turned to leave, to melt back into the crowd that had become a blur around us. "No!" The word ripped from my throat. "Don't you walk away from me, Mark, wait!" I lunged forward, grabbing Lily's hand and pulling her with me. We pushed through a group of tourists, my apologies a frantic babble. He was moving fast, weaving through the alley with a desperate agility, never looking back. I could see the back of his dark head, a beacon of impossible reality in a sea of strangers. "Mark, please!" I screamed, my voice raw with desperation and disbelief. People were staring now, murmuring, but I didn't care. He ducked down a narrow, shadowed side alley, and for a moment, I lost him. I skidded to a halt at the entrance, my chest heaving, scanning the darkness. It was empty. He was gone. Just like that. The vibrant energy of the bazaar crashed back in on me, loud and overwhelming. My legs gave out, and I stumbled against the cool stone wall, sliding to the ground. Tears I hadn't even realized were forming streamed down my face. Mom, what's wrong?" Lily's small voice was filled with fear. "Who was that man? Why did he look like Dad?" I pulled her into my arms, burying my face in her hair, unable to answer. What could I say? "I think I just saw your dead father, and he ran from us like we were the ghosts." My mind was a battlefield. Was I losing my mind? Had the grief finally broken something inside me? But it had felt so real. The details, the voice, the flicker of recognition in his eyes when he saw Lily. My gaze fell to the ground by the stall where he'd been standing. Amidst the dust and discarded wrappers, something glinted, a small piece of metal. Pushing myself up on trembling legs, I walked over and knelt down. It was an old-fashioned brass key, heavy and ornate, attached to a simple worn leather fob. He must have dropped it in his haste. My fingers closed around it, the metal cool against my clammy skin. I turned it over. Stamped into the leather was a symbol, an ankh, the Egyptian symbol for life. It was a common tourist motif, but this one was different. Etched into the center of the ankh's loop was a small, distinct hieroglyph, a single feather. My blood ran cold, my breath hitched. The ankh with the feather. I had seen it before. A wave of nausea washed over me as a memory, long buried under a mountain of grief and denial, came rushing back. It was from a postcard that had arrived in our mailbox about 6 months after the funeral. It was a picture of the Cairo skyline at night. There was no return address, no message, just that exact symbol drawn in black ink on the back. I had assumed it was a cruel, tasteless prank, a piece of junk mail that had slipped through. In a fit of rage and pain, I had ripped it into a dozen pieces and thrown it away. But I never forgot the symbol. It was a mark, seared into my memory. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a coincidence. My husband was alive, and that postcard, it hadn't been a prank. It had been a message. The key felt like a brand in my palm. The ankh with the feather, life and truth. It was the symbol for Ma'at, the goddess of truth, order, and justice. Mark had explained it to me once, his finger tracing the hieroglyph in one of his books. The feather was what Anubis weighed the hearts of the dead against. To be found true, a heart had to be as light as that feather. My heart felt like a block of lead. My mind raced, connecting dots that had been invisible before. Mark had worked as a forensic accountant for a multinational corporation. He'd been uncharacteristically stressed in the months before his death. He'd spoken in vague terms about a big project, about untying some very complex knots that went all the way to the top. Then came the accident, a solo sailing trip on a stormy afternoon. They found the boat, splintered and wrecked against the rocks. They never found a body. The official explanation was that he'd been swept out to sea, lost to the unforgiving currents. I had accepted it. Drowning in my own ocean of grief, I never questioned it. Now that acceptance felt like a betrayal. The postcard, the key, his panicked flight in the bazaar, it all painted a picture I couldn't bear to look at but couldn't ignore. He hadn't died. He had disappeared. He had left us. For 2 days, Lily and I stayed in the hotel room. I held her, answered her frightened questions with hollow assurances, and felt a cold, hard anger begin to replace the shock. How could he? How could he let us believe he was dead? Let his own daughter mourn him? What could possibly be worth that? The key was my only lead. The ornate design seemed more suited to an old piece of furniture than a modern door, and the hieroglyph, it felt personal. I remembered the name of a contact Mark had mentioned once, an Egyptologist named Dr. Hassan who worked at the American University in Cairo. Mark had consulted with him for his research, he'd said. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I found Dr. Hassan in a dusty office filled with maps and artifacts. He was a kind, elderly man with a warm smile that faded when I showed him the key. He recognized the symbol immediately. It was the mark of a private, exclusive society of antiquities collectors, a group dedicated to repatriating stolen artifacts. He told me they operated in the shadows, often at great personal risk, working against powerful and dangerous black market dealers. Your husband, Dr. Hassan said, his voice gentle, was a very brave man. He was helping us track a network that was laundering money through the sale of priceless relics. He discovered how deep the corruption went. It reached into his own company. Suddenly, it all made sense. The stress, the secrecy, the accident. He hadn't left us. He had been trying to protect us. The people he was investigating, they wouldn't have just fired him. They would have silenced him and anyone he loved. He had staged his own death to keep us safe, to cut us loose from the danger he was in. Dr. Hassan knew where the key belonged. It was for a private lockbox at a small old bank in the historic district, a place known for its discretion. He agreed to help, his face etched with concern for the man he clearly respected. Leaving a sleeping Lily with a trusted hotel sitter, I went with him. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm as the bank manager used the key to open a heavy, lacquered wooden box. Inside there was a passport under a different name, a thick stack of various currencies, and a single letter addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. It was Mark's handwriting. My dearest Elena. The letter began. If you are reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong and I have failed. I have failed to stay hidden, and I have failed to keep this world away from you. There are no words to explain the agony of the choice I made, of leaving you and Lily. It has been a death of 1,000 cuts every single day for 3 years. I found evidence of something vast and rotten, Elena. Corruption that ran so deep it threatened to pull us all under. They would have come for you, for Lily. Faking my death was the only way I knew how to sever the connection, to build a wall around you both that they couldn't breach. My plan was to finish my work, to see these people brought to justice, and then find a way back to you no matter how long it took. Seeing you in the bazaar was like seeing the sun for the first time after years in the dark. I ran because my fear for you was greater than my love for you in that moment. I ran to keep you safe. Inside this box is everything you need, a full confession, names, account numbers, evidence. It goes to the man whose name is on the slip of paper beneath this letter. Trust no one else. Forgive me, Elena. Live. Be happy. Know that every breath I have taken since I left has been for you and our little girl. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Always. Mark. Tears streamed down my face, not of sorrow, but of a profound, earth-shattering understanding. The anger was gone, washed away by a tidal wave of love and sacrifice. He hadn't abandoned us. He had shielded us. The next morning, I handed the evidence over to the international authority Mark had named. 2 weeks later, sitting in our hotel room in Cairo, watching the sun set over the Nile, the news broke. A massive international sting operation. Arrests made at the highest levels of Mark's old corporation. A global antiquities smuggling ring dismantled. His name was never mentioned. He was a ghost, a hero in the shadows. A knock came at our door. My heart stopped. I opened it to find him standing there. He looked older, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. But it was him. His eyes, free of panic and filled with a desperate, hopeful love, found mine. Lily, who had been drawing at the table, looked up. Her crayon dropped to the floor. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark knelt, his arms open wide, his face crumpling as she ran into his embrace. He held her, rocking back and forth, his sobs silent. He looked up at me over her head, his eyes asking the question he didn't dare speak. I walked over and knelt beside them, putting my arms around them both, completing the circle that had been broken for so long. There were scars. There were years to reclaim and a new life to build, one far away from the ghosts we'd left behind. But here, in the ancient land of rebirth, under the watchful gaze of the pyramids, we were finally whole. We had found our color again,